Now, are you one of those who work at a company that's allowed you to work from home because of changes made by the pandemic? Well, lucky you. But can you still get fired for drinking on the job, even if you're in the comfort of your own home? Well, let's find out more from Bongani Masuku, Director of Employment Law at Cliff Decker Hofmeyer. Mr. Masuku, thank you very much for joining us here on ENCA. So I asked the question there earlier, can one be fired for having a glass of wine or two while working from home?
Good morning, very well, and good morning to the listener, watchers as well. To answer the question very briefly, the answer is a simple yes, and a person can still get fired for drinking on the job, even though they're working from home. And there's a number of reasons why that is the case in terms of South African law specifically. One of the main reasons is obviously health and safety in the workplace, which is quite a big, an area of big focus in terms of our law. And the Occupational Health and Safety Act, Section 8, provides that an employer has an obligation to create and to maintain a safe working environment for all its employees. And that obligation extends to making sure that you don't have people who are working while they're under the influence of alcohol. That obligation, unfortunately, extends to whether or not you're working at the workplace or even when you're working at home. And the reasons are something that I can expand on a little bit.
Sure. Please do expand, and also just tell us, is it not the company's responsibility as well to also amend policies to stipulate that drinking from home also constitutes a dismissal?
So it's possibly one of the things that most employers are going to have to look at, amending the policy to ensure that that level of clarity is obtained. But as matters stand on the application of the policies as they stand in the application of the labor laws of South Africa and case law, I would say that it's not a train smash if an employer has not amended its policies to reflect that change, that even though you're working from home, you're still expected to work or perform your work while you are not under the influence of any intoxicating drugs or substances. Now, in relation to the reasons why this is the case, there are two main reasons, really. The first is the one that I've already touched on, which is health and safety. So you need to ensure that you yourself are safe and that other people that you work with or that you may come into contact with while performing your job functions are safe from whatever conduct you may exhibit while you are under the influence of intoxicating drugs or alcohol. The second main reason is obviously the issue of performance. Employers have the right and prerogative to expect that their employees perform work of a particularly high standard. And those standards of performance can be compromised when somebody is doing the work while they are under the influence of intoxicating substances or drugs. So for those two main reasons, there really isn't a difference between working from home and working at the office in relation to whether or not you can work while under the influence of alcohol. And the employers themselves differ in terms of whether they apply a zero-tolerance policy on alcohol and drugs use in the workplace, or whether they apply a certain level of alcohol is acceptable in the blood through the use of certain tests that they can use to test whether the person is under the influence of alcohol or not. So it really depends on the nature of the employer, whether the employer has that in terms of the employer's policy, applies a zero tolerance or not so much a zero tolerance. But either way, whatever the policy says of that particular employer, it remains applicable, it remains valid and binding, even if my view would be, even if it has not been amended to say, while you are working from home, you're still expected to perform your work while not under the influence of drugs or alcohol.
Now, what else then should workers be careful of in terms of employment law while working from home? I mean, for instance, what if I want to take a nap? Will I also be in trouble for that?
It really depends on the nature of the job, I would say. Obviously, when the contract of employment provides for the number of hours that a person works on any given day, and COVID-19 has disturbed a lot of things, but those contracts of employment remain valid and binding on employers and employees. So if you're employed to work from 8 to 5, for example, subject to maybe a 10 o'clock tea break for 15 minutes, and for those employers that provide for such, and subject maybe to an hour's break, say between 1 and 2, you're still expected to comply with your contractual obligations to ensure that you only take your breaks at those particular times, I would argue. And in relation to the issue of taking a nap, obviously, while you are at the office, you wouldn't be expected or you wouldn't be allowed to take a nap while on the clock. So therefore, the same rule would have to apply, even though you'd be working from home. There is a lot of flexibility, obviously, in relation to sort of some specific types of employees. So employees in professional services, et cetera, have a relatively much more flexible working arrangement than, say, for example, people who work in the mines and who operate specific machinery, et cetera, which may or may not require that the person who operates the machinery be sitting in front of whatever controls they use or whatever methods of controlling that machinery they are able to use while working from home. So it really depends from one employer to another, and it really depends from the type of the job that a person is employed to perform. And it also goes back, I suppose, to just what are the terms of the contract of employment.
So we've spoken about what the employee should be careful of. What else should companies do to also cover themselves as more companies in South Africa start to allow people to work from home?
So as you've alluded to the example of an amendment to employers' workplace policies, that is one of the things that we mostly advise people, that I would advise employers to have a look at. Consider reviewing your policies in light of the current new normal that we're working under, and consider which of your employment workplace policies have been rendered a little bit superfluous or academic or no longer workable or impracticable under the current circumstances that we have to perform work under. The other thing, of course, is I would caution employers in relation specifically to the issue of the use of drugs and alcohol in the workplace to remain constantly aware of the distinction between incapacity, which is something that the Labour Relations Act provides for in relation to injury or ill health, and the use of drugs and alcohol that can, in some specific instances and circumstances, be considered to fall under that arm of the Code of Good Practice dismissal, i.e. incapacity, where it is proved that it is in fact an illness or a dependency or something along those lines. And a lot of employers already, even before COVID, had a lot of employee assistance programs, which I would emphasize, they also remind themselves that those they come in very handy in making sure that employees are able to be assisted where the drug or alcohol usage is in fact an illness or a dependence. But those are things that the policies or the employee assistance policies and programs provide specifically to say, for example, mostly an employee would be required to come forward and mention that they've got a problem such as this, or they can be picked up through either one of a number of ways that an employer can specify in those employee assistance programs and policies. So I would caution those two. I would say be careful, A, to ensure that you review constantly your business model, your policies, workplace policies, to ensure that they are in line with where we are now, the new normal, and B, that you are aware of the distinction between where drinking at work or being under the influence of alcohol or drugs while at the workplace or while working from home is in fact an illness, in respect of which you need to assist the employee through an EAP program, or whether it's just downright misconduct. Bongani had a bit of a rough weekend with friends in a braai, and he comes back to work and he's under the influence of alcohol, or he's actually trying to get rid of maybe a hangover or something like that, and he has a tipple while he's performing his work, which is straight misconduct for which somebody can be dismissed.
Well, that was Bongani Masuku, Director of Employment Law Practice at Cliff Decker Hofmeyer. Thank you very much for joining us.